give us your Mahomes thoughts and just kind of the overriding thing of like, all right,
Sure.
cool. There's more football, but that's a
Mhm.
big ask for these teams that are trying to close with seeding on the line.
Well, so like, first of all, like, if you don't mind, Ryan, like I'd hit the long-term concern here with Mahomes, because I know there are people in that organization that are worried about the accumulation of lower leg injuries. And it seems like oftentimes you see him so often where he's got guys wrapped around his ankles basically.
Right.
And he's twisting and contorting himself to make throws. And he's tough as nails. No one would ever doubt like what he brings to the table from that standpoint, how badly he wants to play, the things he does in order to get himself in a position to play. But those things can be cumulative. And so I wonder if long term there's some things they got to coach into him. And it reminds me of Todd Haley getting with Ben Roethlisberger in 2012, I believe it was, and or maybe it was 13, right in there somewhere in that period. And Roethlisberger was almost a decade into the league, and he'd done a lot of the same stuff. Now, I'm not saying he's Mahomes, but he had done a lot of the same stuff Mahomes had stylistically in, not being a runner, but running to throw and, being this big body who could withstand the hits. And, Todd Haley coached into him. We want you to get rid of the ball faster. You're not going to hold up if you keep playing this way. And we're going to put these great receivers around you. And you're going to have Antonio Brown and Emmanuel Sanders and Mike Wallace unload the ball. Let them make the plays. And I do wonder if that sort of, like reckoning is coming with Mahomes. And it won't be this year, but in the next couple of years where it's like, look, dude, like I think he's 29 now. Is he 29 or he's going to be 29 next year? Like I don't
I'll
have
look it up for you. Just keep going.
Yeah. So he's approaching 30, bottom line, right? Like, and I believe he's 29 now that I'm doing my head. I think he was born in 95. So he's approaching
29.
30 and
great job.
We've seen this with guys who've gotten beaten up at that position. And so like, I do think that that's part of the equation now with Mahomes is that he's dealt with a lot of this stuff, and fought through it. And that's to his credit, but like I think will be a time where he's going to have to learn to dial it back and play a little bit more judiciously. So that I think like long term will be a part of the equation for him. I think right now, like if I'm the Chiefs, I'm looking at this and I say, you know what, we got a 2-game lead, and regardless, we're almost certainly going to be one of the top 2 seeds. If we win one of our last 3, we're going to be one of the top 2 seeds. So, at worst, we're the top seed playing on Wild Card weekend, and the only road game we would have to play would be in Buffalo in the AFC Championship, where we won last year. It's more important to us right now that we have our quarterback at full speed, as close to full speed as we possibly can have him. And so, like, I look at the schedule and I'm gaming it out, and I see, you've got, obviously a game, with the Texans on Saturday, and then then the Steelers on Christmas. I'm thinking about sitting him for the Texans game, so I give him 10 days of runway into that, which then gives him 11 days of runway if I have to use him in Week 18. And look, the NFL made its bet on this. You know what I mean? Like, the NFL put the teams in these positions where they have to make decisions like this. And I do think, if it's up to Mahomes and it's close, and look, we may get to like 4:00 today, and maybe it's a much more serious high ankle sprain, and he just can't go for the next month because these things can be that serious. But if there's like a question or it's borderline, then I'm saying sit him. And I know, the way that players talk about this particular injury, how playing on it can make it worse, how it can linger. It's sort of one of those, like a hamstring. It doesn't go away unless you give it a lot of rest. And so, if I'm the Chiefs right now, I'm maximizing the amount of rest I'm getting Patrick Mahomes before the playoffs. And I know he's going to hate it. But like, I think this is a decision maybe you have to make for him to give yourself the best chance in January and you hope February.
And the fact there's still, despite the head-to-head, 2 losses up on the Bills in the AFC. I mean, they can rest him, cost themselves a game, and still be in a really good spot here.
Yep.
Then the Pittsburgh game becomes something entirely different because they're going to still have something to play for. But I don't know that you would want to go, let's Look, it all depends on what we learn the rest of the week and all this kind of stuff.
So the other thing I would throw on top of this is just kind of like, I wish they would take what the players say into account a little bit more with this stuff. It does matter that it's this late in the season, you know? Like doing this now is not the same as doing it in October. And making them go through this now is not the same as making them go through it in October. And I think there's another element to it too, which is like, so I was on the field before the Packers-Lions game. We had that game. It was a Thursday night game. And both those teams had played on Thanksgiving, and then they played the Sunday before. So it was 3 and 11 days. So I was talking to a few of the coaches and a couple of the players. And, I was mentioning how, like, it's good even though it's a Thursday game, you get a full week's rest. And a few of the guys said to me, it's like, yeah, but like, you come off of the first Thursday game and now you're playing another one. It's like your body still hasn't had a chance to catch up. So really, like they don't feel like they're going to be whole until they get that mini bye and they go to the following Sunday. So like, I just think it's like, to me at least, Ryan, like you want to have, like, the league should want to have its best players in the best spot going into the playoffs in position to play their very best. And like, I look at this stretch of 3 games in 10 days for 4 teams that are almost certainly going to be in the playoffs. And it's just like, is the juice worth the squeeze here? Like where you could be jeopardizing some guys that are marquee players performance going into the most important month of the year.
Right. But the owners would like to add another game. If they could.
No, they would. I mean, like based on what they got for, based on what they got for the Christmas games from Netflix, I know for a fact this is all going to fall on deaf ears.
Yeah. Right. But look, all you need is a slate like the 1:00 slate yesterday because we saw a bunch of guys in there, whether it was quarterbacks being benched or guys getting hurt. Like there was a lot of backups getting some reps yesterday. And that's whenever anybody, because I think like there's a bigger thing that I would talk about. And there's probably like a bigger segment that I have here in my head, but I'll just share it with you now as it pertains to the NFL part of it. But think of all the changes the NFL has made in a very short amount of time and how often that was met with just like immediate criticism. And the biggest thing was like, oh, well, these guys aren't even allowed to tackle anymore. Might as well put flags on them. Like, this isn't the football I grew up with. It's like, well, it also shows that none of you are turning it off. None of you are turning it off.
Yeah.
So whatever you were pissed about, and like the late hits,
the people
on
who are engaged enough to complain are the last people who are turning it off.
Right. Like, there's nothing that would back up that any of the changes. And I don't blame the NFL for being towards the absurd on how some of the flags are thrown. Like, I hate the sideline stuff that happens, but I understand it. The quarterback stuff, like there's usually 1 or 2 a week where everybody loses their mind. You're like, I can't believe that's a flag. Like, that's ridiculous. It's like, yeah, they just don't want defensive players. They want defensive players scared to death to even hit the guy.
Right.
And guess what? The game keeps on rolling. And as long as they score points, which is happening, I know there was a dip down at the beginning of this year, but I would say like about a 5-year snapshot of it. Like people, based on the ratings, seem to love the points. They don't care about the evolution of the lack of physicality or a removal of certain elements of physicality or the, defenseless receiver stuff that everybody was mad about. It's like, hey, what's a safety supposed to do? I don't know. Well,
yeah,
there's a game on tonight at 8:30 and you're going to watch that one too. So like all of the consternation around it, it hasn't mattered.
And I mean, the other thing is these guys are bigger and faster and stronger than they were 20 or 30 years ago. And the hits are more violent, like naturally because of the force that they're happening with. And it's just, you have to some degree, you have to protect your stars. And like, I understand the whole, like idea of what football was. And there's some of those things that I actually subscribe to, like I do think they should probably hit more in training camp. I think there's evidence out there. I talked to Sean Payton about this over the summer, like how there's a lot of evidence out there that callousing your team makes you healthier in November and December. And that's something they really have to look at. By the way,
I completely agree with that. Yeah. And when John Harbaugh said that years ago, there were so many people in NFL media that just looked at him as this caveman.
Yeah.
And you're thinking, how could you not understand that your body actually needs to be abused a bit to be able to handle abuse?
Right.
I mean, That's pretty standard for anybody that's ever done anything. And yet it was just a ton of people being like, oh, this idiot. And you're just like, no. So that part of it, I completely agree with. But again, the Players Association, when they go to the table with this stuff, they give up money. They
the
give in to some of these
from the owners.
Right. And it's like, can we hit less? They're like, yeah, we don't give a shit.
Yeah. I mean,
never
it's
wear
like
any pads.
It's like, can we have 3 weeks off in the spring? You mean I get to turn the lights off for 3 weeks? Where do I sign?
Cool. We want an extra game. All right. Can we not have weed testing? Sure. We want another game. All right. Even. It's like that's its own conversation of what happens when they sit down at the table and try to redo the CBA every time. I have a money question for you.
Yep.
Because it's starting to be talked about a little bit with the Niners finishing out what's a disappointing season here. Purdy's under contract for 25.
Yep.
At like a nothing number, right?
Yeah.
And the Niners have all sorts of kind of cap issues they're looking at with committed contracts before we talk draft class and all these different things that you point out this morning on SI.com. What do you think happens here with Purdy?
So, I could tell you without reservation, Brock is their guy, and they think he's better than he gets credit for. Kyle loves him. Now, you wouldn't be a Kyle Shanahan quarterback if you didn't do some things that infuriated Kyle Shanahan. So I think that does exist with him to some degree. But, Kyle will tell you, if you sit down and watch the tape, this guy plays like a top of the league quarterback. He is they view him as their guy. So I think it's when, not if, they do a deal with him. But I think the when is massively complicated by this just bottleneck of contracts that they have that they're going to have to clean up this off season. And so, I think what history tells me is that they will try to get out front of it right after the season. That's what they did with Jimmy Garoppolo. If you go back and you look, they signed Jimmy Garoppolo to an extension. I think it was the end of January, in 2018, right after he had just gotten done playing that first half season after the trade. So, I think having that sort of certainty would appeal to them. And now we know with the rest of our players what we're working around. So that's one piece of history that can inform you. I think they will make an effort to try to get out in front of it quickly. I also think at that point, they'd probably be looking for a discount to do it. And if they're looking for a discount to do it, then how much pushback do they get from Purdy's side? Are they trying to play on the insecurity of a guy who was the last pick in the draft? And are they, is Purdy sensitive to that? There's all kinds of dynamics that can play into that. And then there's the history they have the last 3 years. They've had pretty contentious contract negotiations. Last year it was Ayuk. The year before that it was Bosa. The year before that it was Debo. So they've had to ride these things out in the past. So I think they have every intention of getting it done. The question to me is at what price and when? And I don't think that they would be bothered by the idea of going into 2025 with Brock playing playing out the final year of his contract and then having to franchise him in 2026. I don't think that's their preference, but I don't think it would bother them that much to have to do that. Because of all the other business that they have to do with all the guys that are left on their roster now. And then, I think the other thing that's sort of a twist to all of this is that there could be two guys that have a connection to that program as veterans that could be available this offseason, in Sam Darnold and maybe Kirk Cousins. So if those two guys wound up being available, do you use those guys as leverage to try to get your price with Purdy? That's sort of I think a fascinating element that could play out in the first couple of months of the negotiation.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I love this stuff. And it's a good transition because I was going to ask you about Darnold's future here in a second. But I think I would just like to add that the Garoppolo contract was terrible. They made him the highest paid player in NFL history. He had 7 starts under his belt. And then I remember, I think it was the Niners did a thing with Kevin Clark when he was still at the Ringer, where they talked about the Garoppolo contract, and it was so front loaded. And it was almost like, yeah, but look, we paid him so much money now.
Yep.
Then we don't have to pay him as much later. And you went, that's the defense of this contract. But it was also another lesson in the way the quarterback contracts work is it's not so much who you are, it's when you're signing him in comparison to whatever the previous quarterback class got when they redid their deals. So that leads us to the Purdy thing, where it seems like they'll probably take care of their guys. Purdy has far more of a track record than Garoppolo did when they did the deal. You could say maybe we just get away with this for another year, but that's not really how teams do deals with quarterbacks that they feel is their guy. Usually they'll wipe out that cheap year because the agent's like, look, we can't have our guy playing on minimum wage when he's the face of the franchise here.
It also helps you manage it because you're folding that year in, which brings the average per year down, right? Like, because you're folding in that year at whatever, a couple $1,000,000, and now, so like you add the new money average to the end of it, but that really cheap year on the front end, you're folding that in, so it brings the total average down a little bit. And I think
sometimes, but that sometimes that number's been wiped out though. Like didn't they do that with Russell Wilson?
It doesn't get wiped out. No, it always gets folded in. So like the total number you hear is the new money. So the new money is just basically the big number. And then like, it's not like they have to play out that final year of their contract or the final 2 years of their contract, but that's accounted for and folded into the bigger number. So the earlier you do it, the cheaper. If you add like 2 cheap years, now they can't do that with Purdy because of the rules, but that brings the total number down. I also think like what's interesting about this one too is like, it's not just, Patrick Mahomes making that much money. Dak Prescott's at 60, Tua's in the 50s, Jared Goff's in the 50s, Trevor Lawrence is in the 50s. So I think the room for the Niners to say, we got to take you under 50, like, I don't know if they have as much room to say that anymore based on how you would stack Purdy up against a Trevor Lawrence or a Tua Tagovailoa or a Jared Goff.